This is an unofficial and independent review of PMC's 2521i loudspeakers that haven't come from the manufacturer. And this is the baby stand mount and the cheapest model in PMC's range that comes out at £2,400. It's actually quite compact and diminutive, and it uses a 19mm soft dome tweeter and PMC's 5.5-inch own designed mid-bass unit that uses a material made of glass fibre that they label as G-Weave. So this is an 8 ohm speaker, 86.5 dB sensitive, and a frequency response 4 to 6 Hz to 25 kHz, and typical for PMC it uses this trapezoid shaped cabinet. That's the mathematical name for the shape of the design of the cabinet. You'll see that on many PMC designs. This speaker uses a transmission line, which is essentially a folded path within the cabinet of the speaker that takes the bass air off the rear of the bass driver in the cabinet, channels it through the line, removes all but the lowest frequencies, and then spits it out from this front firing port with these fins on it. PMC call this laminaire. Essentially it's to stop chuffing of the air at the port and then speed out the bass air in a linear fashion. The reason I think that they say that transmission line designs have really low distortion is because the bass air that's normally inside the cabinet is sped away, so there's no cushion of air inside like in a sealed design or ported design that can cause distortion of the driver. Obviously having these front ports is a good idea to avoid proximity effects if you're putting speakers near walls. And I found that these transmission line designs of PMC speakers do really augment the bass power of the mid-bass unit. So you can have a small mid-bass unit and then this transmission line port. And also it kind of makes them very freeway sounding because it's almost like you've got an additional driver, and you get that sense that everything meshes together in sound and that there's three components in the sound, if that's stating the obvious, like you do in a freeway speaker. Some reviews I read about these speakers said they didn't actually like the looks, and I don't agree with that. I actually do. I like this busy, aggressive, overly techie type look. They're kind of like what Ben Whishaw's character Q out of the Bond films would have whilst he's picking his nose, mulling over national security data. People that know me know that I actually have owned PMC speakers before, and I actually bought about 10 years ago the 2023s. Were a bit meh in terms of bass dynamics and detail compared to the later 2523s which I've got at the moment, which most people will know I use as my kind of reference speaker. This is the model before the new I range came out, which these 2521i speakers are part of. Before we get into some more information about these speakers, first some specs. Obviously, as an owner of PMC speakers, I'm going to love them, and you might think, well, he's just biased. But I still have to give you information about what they do, who they're for, and some of the things they don't do quite as well, so you can decide. But one thing I will say, and this may sound like I'm just contradicting myself, to the casual observer at least, they just have more sound than they have any God-given right to. And that doesn't make you a heretic if you go with that as an owner and aren't religious. But you'll know what I mean if you own these. This is the type of speaker not to get too...
that smells so plummy and gorgeous. A little heathery, hot Heathland note as well.
That just meshes resolution with bass speed and intonation of the bass. The way that the notes just go up and down and snap back down quickly is so pleasing. So this is a speaker that takes you on a journey of this mid-range recognition of resolution, I'd say, with a well presented and appointed treble, not meh in that type of way, but also with this searingly accurate bass response that If you like any type of music in terms of speed, especially in my case electronica, it's so unbelievably good for music. My impression of soundstage is that they're pretty good width-wise and as well height-wise, but they don't quite have the depth in terms of being able to place musicians on a stage in hearing instruments that are further back on the stage to those that are further forward. They do in some sense, but not amazingly, and this is something that you wouldn't buy these PMCs for. Something like Bucart's S400 Mark IIs that I tried with their rear passive radiator did that much better, but that's probably just down to the design, because PMCs are obviously all about forward firing sound, and it's just a difference of the way that the speakers are designed. And I'd also say that these PMCs are probably just a little bit better speakers if you're going to be using them more in the near field environment. These are definitely speakers that convey the treble when it's needed, so they're not going to be for the smoothest troop. And when you play bad recordings, as far as treble is concerned, they're about as apologetic as Piers Morgan on his channel talking about gender pronouns. And that's perhaps not a bad thing, because when the music is recorded really, really well and there's not any sibilance or excessive treble in the sound, these speakers really hit the spot. So in that kind of sense, I wouldn't say that these are forward-leaning speakers, because you need the treble there on good recordings to go deep into the music and get insight into the music and the pleasing nature of detail in music. But I would concede they aren't speakers for those that like treble to be rolled off. PMC, when they made these speakers, actually uprated the crossover, and these speakers cross over now at 1.7 kilohertz. This is different to the 25 range model. And I wouldn't say it's a massive consideration to upgrade from the 25 range to the 25i range, because there's little wrong with the 25 series already, but it does add to an additional sense of dispersion. The tweeter's obviously doing more work, and you get this sense also there's slightly more detail in the upper or mid high frequencies. Obviously these aren't speakers that are going to be the last word in bass, only going down to 4 to 6 hertz. So using a subwoofer with them could be a consideration. The short transmission line design and small driver is obviously going to lead to that. I've got the same size driver in my 25-23s, and they produce much lower bass because the line is longer and the transmission line has obviously been tuned to produce lower bass. I think basically that's to do with the fact that lesser lower bass is removed, but you don't get a sense with the 25-21i's that they're lacking bass in terms of anything but critical listening, and for everyday use and enjoyment they're fine with bass, especially for the purpose which you're going to use them, probably not in a massive size room. You want to be using these speakers with a suitable quality high powered amplifier. Get the highest powered quality amp that you can afford, obviously use the volume sensibly, and that's because of their sensitivity and the fact that PMC speakers just love power. So think that you'll get better soundstage, more detail, and that lovely bass intonation will improve the more power that you use. Also, I wouldn't just go for the recommended power range that PMC state on their website. There's so many people that I've seen using PMC speakers with amplifiers that just don't cut it, and it's a false economy to go to the trouble to get speakers like this and the quality like this and then just not throw good power and current at them, which they just love. So I actually use 3 amplifiers to test these speakers: Bucart's i150, Hagel H390 and a Cyrus 1 cast, all of which, by the way, drove them really, really well. But predictably it went with the highest powered amplifier, or higher powered amplifiers, that sounded better. So first the Hagel, then the Bucart, then the Cyrus. And that was just in terms of the bass dynamics, bass intonation I talked about, resolution and soundstage. So feeds back into my comment before, get the highest powered amplifier that you can. The lesser priced Bucart S400 Mark IIs were very different speakers, but very nice in terms of more rounded sound, room filling sound, soundstage in all directions type sound. So too these Arundel 1723 Bookshelf S speakers that I've got at the moment as well. And that's perhaps not surprising for the design of these relative speakers. The Bucarts have a rear passive radiator, as I mentioned, but none of those speakers, the Bucarts and the Arundels, were as precise, as intonated with bass and speedy with bass as these PMCs. So I also actually still have Kef's LS50 Meta speakers, which are about half the price of these PMCs, but they're nowhere near in terms of natural resolution, precision and bass speed. You might actually enjoy lower price speakers to higher price speakers like these PMCs, but PMC themselves would have to concede that as much enjoyment could be had from these 25-21i's to their FAT ranges. But if you want a speaker that is just awesome for resolution, bass speed and just bass control, these are the speakers for you. I actually think, for me at least, these smaller PMC babies are at £2,400 in audiophile kind of UK based terms about the right price. I think the floor standing models that PMC make are harder to shoulder in terms of prices, simply because they've gone up massively over the last 10 years. Also, for US customers, conversion from dollars to pounds makes them about £3,000 in price in the US, which, you know, I know value is to different people different things, but it makes it, or it stretches these as a purchasing decision a little bit more. As a final comment, these PMC 25-21i's are still being held to be higher in price compared to the new Prodigy ones that PMC just brought out at the Munich high-end show. In other words, they still think these are the better speakers. Thanks very much for watching.